Well, first I'd say wow to the power of Bloomberg Media and what the research journalists dug up on me and the comments they came back with. But I will say it's a right and it's a responsibility. I have the right to call it the way I see it, but I also have a responsibility to do it in a balanced way. But in response to the article, to all the companies that I've analyzed that didn't like my conclusions or didn't like how I highlighted the shortfalls or didn't like when I talked about compensation or didn't like when I go to shareholder annual meetings and ask questions to management in front of their bosses, the board of directors, or just didn't feel like I was on their side, what I say to all those people and all those corporations is, sorry, not sorry. My job is not to win a popularity contest. My job is to call a spade a spade.
Why did you want to write? I mean, we know why you wanted to write about Mike. We talk about him when he has a call, but what was it that you wanted to get into, Sri?
I mean, arguably, he's one of the most interesting personalities on Wall Street. And here's someone who's been doing bank analysis, right? He's been a bank analyst for more than 30 years, in his fourth decade now. But more importantly, here's someone whose tales go back all the way from the shame of private jet travel with John McCoy, the original dean of Wall Street CEOs, to jousting with Jamie Dimon in 2021, 2022, 2023. He's still there. He's still very relevant. And it doesn't matter what these bank CEOs have to say about him. Privately, they do grumble. They say he has a penchant for grandstanding. They feel he's a bit of a showboat. They feel he's doing things to just needle them.
Sri, Mike's here right now.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
just want you to know, Mike's here.
Mike's in the room.
I will tell you, Mike and I have had several conversations about this. Mike would completely agree. That is how they perceive him. Yet the fact that he's called back for all of these operating committee meetings at these banks, for the management committee meetings, to talk to their senior leaders, to try and explain to them what they can do better to improve their stock, that tells you all about his staying power.
Mike, is that perception that Sri described, some analysts or some executives think of you, is that wrong?
Well, that's this idea. I'm glad we have point counterpoint here. In terms of,
you're welcome.
Anyone. No, in terms of grandstanding, showboating, and some of those other adjectives that corporations use, that's what I've heard now in my fourth decade as a Wall Street analyst. That's what I've heard from corporations when they're trying to control the narrative, when they're very closed-minded. So they don't necessarily say that to my face. So I will say I've been fired. I counted 3.5 times in my 30-plus years, and I have asked CEOs and CFOs directly, like when I was fired from Credit Suisse in 2000, what they were saying about me. And they would just say, I think you're too independent for the new firm. And that's exactly what they said when I got fired then. But I would just say it's not one size fits all. So some banks get it. And so the one line I liked in the article, I didn't like it all, it's the critical. And that's the way journalism goes. I get it. But the one line I like came from Jamie Dimon. And Jamie Dimon said, differing opinions are okay. And guess what? When you have differing opinions, that's called candor. That's called culture. And in the case of JP Morgan, that's called success. On the other hand, you have a worst-in-class bank going back is Citigroup. The last 25 years, most of that time, especially the first 15 years, it was a very closed-minded culture, a groupthink culture. Don't challenge the leaders enough, and you see what has happened to Citigroup. Now, I think Citigroup has turned the corner. So if that's what they're saying behind the scenes, they're not always saying it to me directly, but over my 30-plus years, I have heard it indirectly or through consequences such as, like I said, being fired 3.5 times.
One little thing, in a world where it's hard to express differing opinions, it's really kind of refreshing to hear you say that. But Sri, come on in, because I'm sure you've got a million questions.
No, but just to Mike's point, I'd like to remind everyone, and this is now going back, more than 2 decades, but right when Jamie Dimon was coming on to become CEO of Bank One, I believe Mike had put out a report saying even Hercules can't fix it. And at that time, that bank felt Mike was rude and not sensitive to their needs, and they tried to ban access and not have him on various calls. Jamie Dimon came in and said, that doesn't make sense. We need to have him on his calls. You can't just revoke access. And oh, by the way, everything he's saying is probably right. Later on, when the JP Morgan Bank One merger happened, it was at an investor day in person. Jamie Dimon actually looked at Mike Mayo and said, "Mike, where are you? Stand up, admit you were wrong." That is the kind of banter that the two of them have had. People have called them frenemies over the years. It's not like Mike is always complimentary about Jamie Dimon. It's not like he's always hostile to him, but he calls it as he sees it. And that's perhaps one of the reasons why he's been relevant for so long.
Hey, Mike, I wanted to talk a little bit about health and about exercise, and because part of the story talks about the powerlifting that you've gotten into just in the last few years. I did not know about this.
I didn't know.
So Shri and Bree write that you got to this after 2021, after learning that you had osteoporosis and realizing that you'd broken 15 bones over the course of 5 years. Can you just talk a little bit about, your routine and sort of how powerlifting has it improved your life and sort of the balance between athletics and banking? And Carol, you want to jump
I want to
in?
get into that, but I just want to mention a headline: the SEC granting approval for Bitcoin ETFs.
Okay.
So, Mike, feel free where you want to go. You can talk about your workouts, but you can also talk about kind of the changing landscape of the financial investment landscape, because I'm wondering if you have any kind of comment on that.
Well, I would say that the job of a Wall Street analyst can be very intense, stressful, dynamic, sometimes with long hours when you least expect it. And so, I now work at a Wall Street division of a Main Street bank at Wells Fargo. And, they encourage a work-life balance, and I need it. And so this is my outlet for that. And I was raised during the 70s when it was all about, the book of running, and I ran marathons, and I did cycling. And the last few years, as your body talks to you, you adjust. And, my bones are weak, and I needed to strengthen my bones and do a pivot. So my pivot was to get into strength training and specifically powerlifting. And, I guess I'm that stereotypical person on Wall Street. Like when you go into something, you go all the way. And so it wasn't enough for me to do this. I had to go ahead and compete. So I competed in my first meet a little over 2 years ago, and I got disqualified. I failed. So I missed my first 3 attempts. But then I went back and I went to nationals last year, where I placed second and broke into the 1,000-pound club. But that's squat, bench, and deadlift. But the average person loses half their muscle mass between the ages of 40 and 80. And so as you age and it starts to get you and bite back. And I'm hitting PRs, personal best records, even as I get older. And so I think the story about strength training has been underrepresented in our society. I feel like an evangelist for strength training and powerlifting and all that comes along with it. But the genesis of that is the need to have a work-life balance when you work long, hard hours on Wall Street.
And I will quickly add that I think Mike's biggest disappointment in the story was we mentioned his performance at the Memphis meet and not his personal best that came a few months earlier when he did break into the 1,000-pound club.